Welcome to the Marxist Workers Party's podcast, Izwi Labasebenzi, bringing reports and analysis of the news from a working class and Marxist perspective, fighting for jobs for all, a 12,500 Rand per month minimum wage and high-quality service delivery, organising to arm the workers and trade union movement with a revolutionary socialist and Marxist programme, building the struggle against capitalism and for working class political power and socialism.
The date is the 11th of March 2021. In this bulletin, we analyse the ANC's 2021 budget, review the Saftu Trade Union Federation's 24 February strike, celebrate International Working Women's Day, and give an update on the ongoing struggle of the Gauteng's EPWP workers. On the 24th of February, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni delivered the 2021 budget on behalf of the ANC government. It stuck firmly to the plan outlined in June's special budget and the October medium-term budget policy statement. The working class and poor will pay the highest price for the economic disaster and sovereign debt crisis accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Indeed, as we publish this podcast, Stats SA has confirmed that in 2020, the South African economy shrank by a staggering 7%, saying it is the worst slump since at least 1946. Bloomberg cited South African Reserve Bank data that showed it was the biggest economic contraction since 1920. Mboweni announced that 303 billion will be cut from the wages of the public sector workers over the next 4 years. The government has been emboldened to deepen its attack on public sector workers by the recent Labour Appeal Court judgment. This found that the cancellation of the final leg of the 2018 public sector wage agreement was not only illegal but unconstitutional. The weak response of the public sector trade union leaders, who still refused to prepare their members for a public sector general strike, was an additional green light. We analysed the LAC judgment and its implications in detail in a statement published on our website on the 20th of February, which we encourage our listeners to read. Also in the budget, for the first time in 10 years, social grants will not be increased in line with inflation. In other words, they will not keep pace with price rises for food, clothing, and other essential goods and services. Over the next 3 years, this will take a massive 36 billion Rand away from the 18 million social grant recipients, the poorest of the poor in society. The ANC government's insolence has now been stripped of all its hypocritical pretense of being, quote, biased towards the poor. Mboweni, defiantly justifying increasing social grants by less than the price of a loaf of bread, said, quote, there is no social contract that says every year there must be X amount of increase. Yet, in sharp contrast, the already low corporate tax rate of 28% was reduced to 27%. One Treasury official, playing the usual scandalous game of divide and rule, said it was necessary to take money from social grants in order to fund the temporary social relief of distress grant and Ramaphosa's long-promised job creation program. There is not a word about the measures to stop the 100 billion Rand annually that big business smuggles out of the country through illicit capital flows. This is quite a different tune to the usual propaganda sung by the ANC that in the pandemic we are all, quote, in it together. The reality is cuts for the poor to give more to the rich. In total, government spending on jobs and services will be reduced by 5.2% or 265 billion Rand in the coming years. Despite the ongoing pandemic and expectations that the country will suffer at least a third wave, not even the health budget will be spared. It is being cut by 3 billion Rand over the same period. In the run-up to the budget, It was widely reported that the government had received a tax windfall from an increase in mining industry taxes because of the unexpectedly huge profits from mineral exports to China. In other words, the size of the anticipated decline in taxes paid to the government because of reduced economic activity under the lockdown was reduced by what is probably a once-off increase. Despite this, the tax shortfall was still the biggest in history by far. However, Mboweni made it clear that all this money will be handed over to the South African government's foreign and domestic capitalist creditors. The profits of these machonisas, the interest on loans they have made to the government, will consume nearly 21% of government revenue every year for the foreseeable future. This is a massive transfer of wealth from the poor, the working class, and the middle class to the capitalist class. In our 3rd of November 2020 podcast, we analyzed the class interests that lie behind the ANC's fiscal policy, that it is designed to defend the capitalist profit system and protect the interest of the minority capitalist class. We recommend that our listeners revisit that podcast as crucial background to understanding this budget. Confirming the analysis we made then, in the run-up to the budget, the American-based credit rating agency Moody's, unelected watchdog for the financial interests of imperialist powers, threatened that it would downgrade South Africa further if the so-called debt consolidation, i.e. cuts to pay jobs and services, was not central to the budget. The International Monetary Fund went even further. After a week of meetings with South African government officials, they said, quote, "Reining in large fiscal deficit and debt will require containing the wage bill and avoiding ill-targeted subsidies and transfers to inefficient SOEs." Local capitalist lobby groups, the Mineral Council of South Africa and Business Unity South Africa, echoed these calls. The ANC government delivered for the capitalist class. The ground continues to be prepared for sharpening class conflict in the coming months and years. As we have noted previously, the ruling class, or sections of it at least, recognize and fear the social explosion they are preparing. This is why the social relief of distress grant has been extended a second time now until the end of April. The decision originating in the ANC-NEC reflects the ruling party's fear that the growing anger and frustration of the masses will lead to them being punished at the ballot box in the local government elections. Despite these concerns, however, the lack of an effective, coordinated working class fight back continues to embolden the ANC government and the capitalist class behind them to push their attacks as far as possible.
This brings us to our review of the Section 77 strike called by the South African Federation of Trade Unions, Saftu, on the day of the budget. Because of the COVID pandemic, the action took the form of a stay-away, with workers asked to withdraw the labor by remaining at home. In addition, groups of determined activists, limited in number in order to observe COVID protocols, protested in Johannesburg, Pretoria, Cape Town, Durban, and other cities. This action was significant for being the first initiated by Saftu since the state of disaster was declared 11 months ago. Although Saftu had called on its members to support the Section 77 strike called by COSATU in Fudusa on the 7th of October, turnout was minimal. Significantly, the COSATU leadership felt under enough pressure from its members to announce that it, quote, stood in solidarity with the strike. However, it made this announcement only the day before the strike to ensure that its own members would have no time to mobilize. In addition to the enormous limitations imposed on the protest and political gatherings by the COVID-19 pandemic, unfortunately, poor preparation and weak organization by the Saftu leadership meant that 24th February fell short of its potential. That potential was demonstrated by reports the MWP has received from NUMSA members of a complete shutdown of the motor assembly plants in Tshwane of Volkswagen, Daimler and Isuzu and their suppliers in the Eastern Cape, as well as action by NUMSA members in the Western Cape and KZN. The support of the NUMSA members for the strike compelled NUMSA General Secretary Ivan Jim to issue a statement of support after initially opposing the general strike, and his supporters in the Saftu leadership even questioning the constitutionality of Saftu's campaign committee which planned the strike. Although Saftu's May 2018 Section 77 general strike enjoyed much wider support among Saftu's 700,000 strong membership, in contrast to the near total news blackout then, the 24th of February action actually received much wider publicity. However, despite the obvious weaknesses in preparation, the Marxist Workers Party pointed out that the success of the strike would be determined not simply by the numbers participating, but by whether or not the Saftu leadership used it as a launchpad for a program of mass rolling action. In other words, as the first day of a sustained working class fight back. To assist the strike to play this role, we propose it be used to call for the reconvening of the Working Class Summit, which in 2008, at Saftu's initiative, brought together 147 working class organizations. We also called for the rapid setting of a date for follow-up strike action in order to build a sense of momentum linked to a serious campaign of mobilization within Saftu to ensure a more solid strike next time. Although a date for new action has not been announced yet, there has been progress around the Working Class Summit. On Friday, the 5th of March, a meeting of the Working Class Steering Committee took place. Wiseman Hamilton, General Secretary of the MWP, who sits on the Steering Committee, reports.
The revival of the Working Class Summit by the Saftu leadership is an important step forward. It has been agreed that the steering committee will meet fortnightly going forward, and that a program of building structures in every province will now commence. This will enable provincial summits to be called in preparation for the second national Working Class Summit to take place possibly around May Day, the Workers' Day public holiday. We agree with the Working Class Summit Steering Committee that we must be conscious of the fact that since the process of reviving the Working Class Summit began, the number of participating organizations is significantly down on the total of 147 that took part in the first summit in July 2018. There will need to be a process of rebuilding and, crucially, bringing in fresh organizations from the youth and communities in working class areas especially. The question of the composition of the next summit is also hugely important. Trade unions and workers' organizations, as well as community organizations involved in day-to-day struggles, are seriously underrepresented compared to NGOs, for example, on the Working Class Summit Steering Committee. The Marxist Workers Party believes that Saftu shop stewards have a key role to play in reaching out to working class community organizations, crisis committees, concerned resident groups, and so on. This will ensure the reconnection more directly of the struggles in the workplace and those in communities. This will enable the revival of the traditions of workers' unity that underpinned the workers' movement, that ensured the defeat of apartheid, playing a central role in it, and must now overthrow capitalism and establish a socialist society. In addition, we believe that the union delegations attending the summit should be based on workplaces, not head offices alone. Invitations should not just be extended to the leaders of COSATU and other federations, but directly to workers in the workplace, the shop stewards committees, etc. For example, mine workers in AMCU and workers in other unions and federations should be encouraged to attend and welcomed irrespective of the response of their leaders. Let us make the next summit a real parliament of the working class. The recent announcement by the Nehao leadership that they will not campaign for the ANC in the upcoming local elections is very significant. It further reveals the irreconcilable class contradictions between the workers trapped in the tripartite alliance by COSATU and the capitalist ANC. It is obvious the leadership is reflecting the anger of their members at the cancelled final leg of the 2018 collective agreement and now the 3-year pay freeze. With thousands of members beginning to join Saftu unions, the Nehao leadership is desperately trying to avoid what could become a mass exodus of their members, such as the NUM experienced in 2012, the year of the Marikana massacre. It is yet another indication that the workers' movement needs to debate the question of working class political representation. In other words, the creation of a mass workers' party with a socialist program. The 2018 Working Class Summit passed a resolution in favor of creating such a party. These discussions must continue at the next summit with a view to uniting all struggles in the workplace communities amongst youth and students and setting a date for the launch of such a party as soon as possible.
Izwi will report on the progress towards the next summit in future broadcasts, as well as the important political and strategic debates that will inevitably emerge around it.
On the 8th of March, working class people around the world mark International Women's Day. The day itself originated within the working class and socialist movement over 100 years ago. In a statement published by the Committee for Workers International, the CWI, to which the MWP is affiliated, Claire Doyle, a member of the International Secretariat, explained,
"There is no absence of struggles, even in the time of COVID, which display elements of revolution. Following on from the heroic fight of the youthful pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong, we've seen the outburst of anger at the wealth and autocratic rule of the Thai monarchy. Fearless young women have been to the fore in these struggles and in the End SARS movement that shook Nigeria last October. Likewise, in Myanmar, women teachers and nurses have taken a leading role in the general strike movement to oust the military. Andrew Tillett Sachs, a labour organiser based in Myanmar, is quoted in Labour Notes as saying, "The sight of industrial workers, largely young women garment workers, seems to have deeply inspired the general public, broken down some of the fear, and catalysed the massive protests and general strike we are seeing now." Women have also been in the front ranks of other recent movements to overthrow despotic rulers, such as in Algeria and Sudan. In Belarus, despite the COVID epidemic, and partly because of Lukashenko's dismissal of its seriousness, week after week, working class women, as well as wives and partners of imprisoned oppositionists, have shown their determination to end despotic one-man rule. While fearless in their confrontations with the forces of the state, all these women and their fellow male fighters have one hand tied behind them. To carry a revolution against capitalism through to completion, a party with a clear idea of how to proceed and how to establish a truly democratic socialist workers' government is vital.
In South Africa too, the pandemic has again revealed the double oppression that working class women face under capitalism. Because of women's continuing segregation in casual, low-paying and under-organized sectors of the economy, they accounted for 2/3 of the job losses arising from the pandemic. Under the hard lockdown, women were more likely to live in households that ran out of money, severely aggravating the crises of domestic violence and femicide. The MWP calls on the workers' movement to give leadership to society in the struggle to stop gender-based violence. A campaign led by women trade unionists could fill such a struggle with the class content it lacked on the pre-pandemic protests.
It is nearly 1 year since the ANC-run Gauteng Department of Infrastructure Development used the pandemic and hard lockdown as a cover to dismiss over 3,000 EPWP workers. In the months before the dismissal, the workers had been waging a determined campaign for permanent jobs and a living wage after spending 7 years on the ANC's slave labor EPWP program. They had organized under the banner of the Gauteng EPWP Workers Forum and were supported by the MWP and the NUPSO trade union. In June, with the easing of the lockdown, workers returned to the streets, protesting outside the Gauteng legislature, demanding they keep promises to intervene in the dispute. With ongoing restrictions on movement and gatherings due to the pandemic, not to mention the desperate poverty faced due to the loss of their small stipends, workers organized a guerrilla strategy of regular pickets and protests outside their former workplaces. Executive Mukwebo, MWP member and provincial coordinator of the EPWP Workers Forum, gave us this update.
Throughout the last year, the ANC has continued its cat and mouse game with the workers. They promise negotiations, set a date, and then either postpone or cancel at the last minute, or just ignore that there was a set date. Jacob Mamabulo, currently the MEC for Transport and Roads, was actually responsible for the repeated renewal of the EPWP workers' contracts when he was then the MEC for the DID. Mamabulo is also the provincial secretary of the South African Communist Party. He is the latest face for the Gauteng government's game playing. Now, despite promises to the contrary, dismissed workers' posts continue to be filled, even while Mamabulo drags the negotiations on.
Clear that the ANC or SACP for that matter could not be relied upon to negotiate in good faith, NUPSO has opened a CCMA case on behalf of the workers. Finally, after months of silence from the Commission, a date has been set down for the case. It will be heard on the 9th of April. The MWP calls on EPWP workers and their supporters in the trade union movement to mobilize outside the CCMA on the 9th of April and to plan protests outside Jacob Mamabolo's office and the office of the Gauteng Premier. Izwi will report on the CCMA proceedings and EPWP workers' protests in future podcasts.
If you have any questions or comments about the contents of this bulletin, please let us know, and we may try and respond in future bulletins. Also, if you know about or are involved in any struggles you would like us to report on, whether that is in your workplace, your community, your university, college or school, or have any suggestions of future topics that you would like us to cover, please contact us. The Marxist Workers Party is an affiliate of the Committee for a Workers' International, the CWI, building global working class unity in the struggle for a socialist South Africa, a socialist Africa, and a socialist world. If you would like to join the Marxist Workers Party or find out more about us, including building the CWI in Southern Africa, please visit our website at www.marxistworkersparty.org.za, find us on Facebook and Twitter, or call or WhatsApp us on 081 366 7375.